I'm Madeline Edwards, and I'm going to show you how I was able to answer the research question, to what extent has the increase in global temperatures caused a migration of vector mosquito populations to Long Island? I know right now, all of you can picture yourself in a couple months enjoying whether it be the beach, the backyard, or camping, soaking up the summer sun. Just as easily as you can picture these images of relaxation, I know you can also feel the pesky bite of a mosquito on your arm. While mosquitoes might just seem like a summer nuisance, I'm here to show you that they can have fatal consequences. I researched how climate change has affected vector mosquito populations close to our school, and I was able to find results that you'll want to stick around to hear. By definition, a vector species is an insect or other organism that transmits a pathogenic fungus, virus, or bacterium. Typically, they take a fungus bacterium from an animal and take it to a human or vice versa. This picture shows how a mosquito, which is one of the most prevalent types of vector populations, takes the West Nile virus from a bird to other animals and humans. They suck the blood from the infected bird and then bring it to the human when they bite them. There are over 3,000 species of mosquitoes. However, only 3 genuses are responsible for the vector species. The next aspect of my research was seeing how the global temperature increase, reported 1.7 since 1880 by NASA, has affected Long Island. I know that global warming is happening, but I had to see if Long Island was affected by it. Then I would be able to see if mosquito populations showed a change and climate showed a change that would result in a population migration with an outside factor contributing to it. So I'm going to show you the 3 different types of genus species just so you see how close to home they are. The first is the Culex group, which is the house mosquito. It is the largest transmitter of West Nile virus. An interesting fact is that it can survive the winter months, so it's not just a summer pest. Next is the Aedes group, and this would be the tree hole and floodwater mosquito. They're most responsible for dengue fever, yellow fever, and the Zika virus. Lastly is the Anopheles group. Anopheles are the biggest transmitters of malaria. They have 2 interesting facts. The first being that they can survive in more versatile waters, fresh and salt, making them more prevalent in more environments than other species. Also, the females do not bite. The next part of my research was adding context to both my mosquito information and my climate data put together. The first thing I realized was I was able to identify trends from other researchers that helped me establish my own research question. So a South American study determined that with the population they were observing, climate circumscribes the distribution of mosquito-borne diseases. This means that climate can change where vector species live and then affect the human populations there. Next, I was able to see that in the United States in general, not just Long Island, from 1922 to 2000, there was an increase in dengue fever. This was interesting to me because I could observe this trend, which the study did not give a cause for why this increase happened, and also add it to my research in my own area. Lastly, I'm sure you all remember the Zika outbreak of 2015 and the West Nile virus spike in the early 2000s. Both of these raised flags for me because if they were becoming so prevalent at the same time period, there must be a contributing factor that has caused this increase in disease. After all this preliminary research, I was able to determine that I need to do 3 things in order to answer my research question sufficiently. The first was that I had to make sure that my type of research design would work. So I used the research biological and physical science of climate change focused on mosquito-borne diseases, which had both a data mining and researching aspect to it, which is how I originally began my project. Next, I knew that there were 2 things I had to prove. There was an increase in climate temperature and an increase in mosquito population, whether it be new diseases in new areas or new mosquitoes but in more volume of disease. So the data mining approach that I chose was the causal correlative data mining research design. By definition, this strategy seeks to find relationships between independent and dependent variables after an event has already occurred. This is perfect for a historical study like mine because I can find new relationships from old data. There were also 2 other factors that I thought would help me when choosing this research design. The first was that there were multiple outcome possibilities. Even if I did all my research and got all my data and found that the factors didn't cause one another, I could still find a correlative relationship and be successful with the data mining research design that I chose. Lastly, it was an easily adaptable methodology. As I mentioned, I started in both data mining and wet lab experimenting, but when I realized I would not be able to ever get enough samples at the high school level for mosquitoes that could possibly be vector species, I knew it was better to look at sources that already had mosquito information historically, so I would have a more volume of samples. This way I was able to do a causal correlative wet lab and data mining first, and it easily transitioned into just data mining. So I used a numerous amount of databases in order to find information in two categories: temperature information and mosquitoes and disease. Both of my temperature information databases came from the NOAA. The first, which was the National Weather Service, I used just to look at almanacs and little snippets of news from the past that remarked on interesting times in temperature or precipitation. However, the next site, the National Centers for Environmental Information, came with a Climate at a Glance database. This database allowed me to input multiple variables in order to come up with a table and a graph of climate in any region I chose. Long Island is the Coastal Division 4 climate region, so when putting that in, I decided to observe the years 1930 to 2017 for climate. This site made it very easy to see the trend that I wanted to find, which was an increase in temperature, in front of me in order to interpret the data to see if mosquito populations would increase at the same time. Finding information on mosquitoes and disease was a little more difficult than the temperature information because before 1970, they really didn't record diseases in correlation with mosquitoes as much as they do now because it is a growing problem. However, through the use of the Suffolk County Government Health Services and the New York City Department of Health database, I was able to find a lot of recent information on mosquitoes. To look into the past, I used VectorMap, which was a database created by multiple researchers that had a map, and they would pinpoint on the map where research on vector mosquitoes had taken place, and if you clicked on that spot, you would be able to see when it took place, what factors it decided, and multiple links to both the researchers' other work and to that work itself. This was very important to me because it helped fill in the blanks that I couldn't find from government information for past records. Additionally, to get more context, I read the Controlled Mosquito-Borne Diseases in New York City, which talked about mosquitoes being caught and tested for disease in the New York City purples. So when I was combining all my data, I thought it would be most efficient to make a chart so I could see each variable and how it changed over time. First, on the left side, I did the year. I have the years from 1930 to 2017. Well, this chart will just show you snapshots of the different segments of my data that I thought was important. So first, when using Climate at a Glance, I recorded the temperature, and then in parentheses, it is the deviation from the mean being 30.7 for January every year from 1930 to 2017. The highlighted years are years that have a positive temperature deviation from the mean. Most of them were having a positive deviation from the mean as we got advanced closer to the present day. Next, when I found the number of disease reported, I would put it into this segment and then say what disease was detected, where it was detected, and whether it was mosquito caused. Interestingly enough, all the diseases that I found information for were correlated with a mosquito. They never just recorded malaria and would say unknown cause. They almost always knew that it was from a mosquito. So the first year that I have is 1930. You'll notice that it says none on record. I only had data for 3 years in the 30s because, as I said, there was a lack of information. So some things have none on record with the positive deviation from mean, while if it had a negative deviation from mean, if it had none on record, I would leave it. This snapshot shows from 1974 to 1979, where we began to see more activity in the mosquito department. Malaria and dengue fever became prevalent in areas close to Long Island. Next, you'll see the 2000s. In the 2000s, there was a lot of activity of West Nile virus in Suffolk County. There were other cases of dengue, triple E, and malaria. However, I thought it was most important to note West Nile virus because of the sheer number of cases present. This is the table and graph that Climate at a Glance generated for me. It came with a table on the side, which I translated into my own table, and then they made this graph. So you'll see in gray, that is the mean temperature, 30.7, and the purple is all the temperatures that were recorded for the time period. This blue line was very important in my research because the website noted a trend for me. It showed that there was a 0.1% temperature increase per decade, and I thought that was really interesting. It amounted to a 0.87 increase in total in the time period. It may not seem like a lot, but even a little bit of warming can allow a new population to flourish where it hadn't before. So when I was making my conclusions, I picked out significant years of my data. From 1937, 1946, 1983, 1990, and 1999 to 2015, each of these years had an interesting mosquito happening. All the ones in white were years that had a positive deviation from mean. This is when malaria was first found, dengue was first found, and then 1999 was when West Nile virus was first found near Long Island. In 2015, however, it is in black because it had a negative deviation from mean. However, it had the most cases of mosquito diseases reported throughout all my research. In terms of answering my question, I was able to determine that there was a correlation between mosquito populations and climate on Long Island. While I can't definitely determine cause, I knew that because they were both increasing, it had to either be because a different factor was causing both of them to increase, or they could be causing the other one to increase. I thought it was very interesting that I was able to answer my question using my data significantly. There were multiple limitations to my experiment, one being that real samples were not accessible as I changed from a wet lab experiment to a data mining project. Also, as I mentioned, the data was less dense in the years before 1970, so perhaps if a study with more resources repeated my methodology, they would be able to get more results in that area. Lastly, the region of study had to be expanded. Well, originally I wanted to only focus on Suffolk County and perhaps the greater parts of Long Island. I eventually had to evolve to the greater Long Island area, which included the boroughs, so that I would have enough information to make an accurate conclusion. The implications of my study, while limited by the fact that I am a high schooler, are huge. I want to alert unprepared populations and apply knowledge to other U.S. states so that we can preserve human health and promote medical research.
Thank you, Maddie.
What was the most important source of information you found while conducting your research, and why was it important?
So I'm going to answer the question by breaking up into my two different categories of data. So for my temperature data, it was very helpful for me to have the Climate at a Glance website. It allowed me to put in the exact specifications I needed, such as the Coastal Division 4 on Long Island, the years I wanted to study. It wasn't like I was fishing for different temperature informations from other studies or multiple sites. It had it all in one place, so it allowed that part of my research to be really easy. I put it into the table, looked at the deviation from mean, so that part really helped me begin my project. And then in terms of the mosquito and disease information, I thought that the vector map was very useful because it wasn't just pulling things from government databases, which can be limited at sometimes. It was actual researchers that pulled together and said, hey, vector mosquitoes are an up-and-coming problem, and we need to create a database, not only so that we have more knowledge about it, so that the public can have more knowledge. I did not have to pay for any of the information on there. It was all accessible. So I thought the fact that that public knowledge on vector mosquitoes and other researchers done on it worldwide was very important to me.
How might your conclusions or findings relate to the current body of work in the community or field of research?
So my findings show that in our own community on Long Island, there has been an increase in both temperature and mosquitoes. So contributing to the current body of knowledge, when I made my research question, I based it on similar projects in different areas, but I was not able to find any in the United States. So firstly, my research would show that the trend that they found in South America and Africa is occurring farther north than they anticipated, which is really interesting because before, as I said, in the 1800s, there might not have been this much mosquito activity, and they might never even today thought that it could get this far north as Long Island in order for these certain tropical mosquitoes to live. So I think that it helps show that the United States is experiencing global trends, and it helps show that mosquitoes are moving farther than they ever had before.
Think about the initial curiosity that led to your inquiry. What other areas of inquiry might that same curiosity lead you to?
I was initially curious about this because I hate mosquitoes, and I know a lot of people do. So I thought that not only would this research, if I was able to answer my question, it would contribute to my knowledge, but other people would be interested in it because mosquitoes affect everyone. But I think the same curiosity would lead me into looking into other states because I originally focused on the area I was in because I thought that I could collect samples in the first time, so that's why I made this my section of research. However, I would like to look at more northern states and see if they had mosquito interactions as well, because it would be interesting if Maine, which is so cold, or even Canada, was experiencing an increase in West Nile virus or malaria that they hadn't before. So I would like to expand my research to other regions. In terms of other topics, I think that I could also look at different types of vector species besides mosquitoes that are also moving northward that could affect us the same way.
Thank you.
Thank you.